are at an elite university. That's the smallest proportion of any ethnic group. But this is an increase from 8% in 2011. Historically, black pupils were the least likely to attend, but in the latest data, they overtook white counterparts with 10.7% now attending. In recent years, admissions tutors have been allowed to take an applicant's background into account when considering offering them a place. Well, joining me now to break this down further is a friend of the show, social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ehsan. And in the studio, I'm joined by London Assembly member Shaun Bailey. Rakib, can I ask you, do you think the fact that fewer white pupils are attending university has any significance whatsoever? Can we really draw too much from this?
Well, I think firstly, Darren, when we're looking at these kind of university participation rates, we have to understand there's a myriad of social and cultural factors at play. I think there's definitely discussion to be had in terms of how elite universities, how connected they are, or rather how disconnected they are with white working class communities. I think there's also discussion to be had in terms of how levels of public investment is distributed throughout the country. So, for example, how are public resources allocated to inner city boroughs in London compared to ex-industrial towns in County Durham or deprived parts of Devon in the southwest of England. So there's obviously a discussion to be had when it comes to levels of investment, how that's being distributed. But there's many factors that come into play when we look at educational outcomes, Darren. As you know, it depends on things like family structure. To what extent is there an education-related ethos in local communities? What are the true markers of social status in the local neighbourhood? The degree to which parents are involved in sort of the parental monitoring of anti-study technological influences. So I think there's so many things that come into play. And we should also look at improvements when it comes to particular schools. I'm of Bangladeshi origin. In recent times, there's been a real jump, a real increase in levels of education attainment among British Bangladeshi pupils. And that's actually largely because there's a select number of schools in London's eastern boroughs, which are now doing particularly well. So I think that what that really shows, Darren, is that you really need to dig deep in the data to really understand what's going on when it comes to educational outcomes in modern day Britain.
Shaun Bailey, what's your view?
I think there's two things that really need to be said, possibly a third. Firstly, colour is a very poor way of deciding who you're going to help. No government in its right mind can say we'll help this group and not that help group. What we should be doing is focusing on the social outcomes, the social start point of young people and then boosting them that way. That's the first thing. The second thing, actually, this is covering of white middle class guilt. When universities look at things in this way, it allows them to not look at the fact that it's the same old people from their social group that ended up in university anyway. The point I want to make, this is as much about class as it is about colour, more so in my opinion. What are those universities doing to take that into account? Now, I accept that taking class into account is complicated, but it's not beyond the wit of man. And thirdly, we have to look at regions in the country as well, and regions within regions. People talk about London if it's paved with gold. Many of the poorest places in the country are actually in London. People also talk about the fact that in a city, well, actually, lots of the real bad poverty in this country happens to be rural. The point I'm making is very complicated, and you mustn't use race as the way to dictate where you put your resources.